Well, hello. It's story time with Audra again, but this one's for adults. Please do not read this or watch this in front of your children. This is from my book, Blondes in Business, a few years ago, and we did quite well and ended up on television because of it. Thank you very much. So here goes, and it's for adults only, and it's just an excerpt. I have other books coming for adults too. Go the F to bed, so stand by with that. Thank you, Ruth, for requesting that, and I've got other requests, and I've got more children's books coming with underlying messages, so stand by for those. But here's my story, the continued story. But I'm only going to do 3 pages because I'll bore you to death. A Kent girl born and bred, town of Deal. I attended secondary school, which I despised, and left as soon as I could to go to the good old US of A. To get my ticket money, I spent a season on Hoverspeed, which I mentioned before, if you remember. It's a hovercraft service from Dover to Calais and Boulogne. I worked as cabin crew and I duly threw up on every rough day we had. And, being the English Channel, that was most days. The passengers ended up looking after me a lot of the time, so there came a point where I could no longer fly. Yes, we flew. We flew 8 inches above the sea, so had Civil Aviation Authority training just like normal aircrew. Eventually, I had to ground myself due to my unprofessional throwing up episodes. And by chance, I was asked to train the next influx of trainees as all the trainers had gone down with flu. Yippee! Opportunity knocks in the strangest of places. So where it all began. The training hovercraft proudly sat on the sea on the harbour wall, and I threw myself into it, not off of it. Well, talk about baptism by fire. I'd only been there a season myself, but I loved it and realised that training was for me, and there started my lifelong love of training and development. The CEO had called me in on a number of misdemeanours. I think I mentioned that before. I dared not to wear my scarf, hat and gloves in public, among other things. But after the training sessions, he told me that I'd done very well and should make that my career. Oh my God, what's he created? But of course, if you remember the other story, he also told me to bugger off for 2 years and get some life experience. So I did. However, America was still calling and I had to get out of my old system. So away I went and grabbed all the experience I could, starting off as a nanny to 3 kids under 4. This may explain why I don't have children now. I also became an English confidant to a family, but that's another story and all a bit mad. So I eventually returned to the UK on holiday to attend my mum and stepfather's wedding, and then ended up bloody staying in the UK. Like a stupid girl, I stayed for a man, which eventually ended, naturally. I returned to the ferry industry and worked as a ground hostess this time, as the sea was not for me. And as part of my role, I designed a training manual, which we nicknamed the Hostess Bible. I was then borrowed, it's a kind word for poached, from one ferry company to another, and the training side of me just shone through with each role I accepted. Ferries, marriage and redundancy. Eventually, I was promoted to the port manager's assistant for a ferry company and even learned how to load a ferry. I was the first female to do that in a port, I'll have you know. But I missed the training and the contact with the people and gladly took redundancy when offered, as the port was to close down. But just before it did, I met my husband-to-be. Happily divorced now, thank you. That 18-month nightmare ended with me renting out my house and looking for work in London or even abroad after spending a few years at Pfizer UK Limited. I had a great job there with a great boss who actually became one of the main influences in my career and my life, a wonderful friend. Debbie Cook was her name. She was my boss and then became my best friend. And she encouraged me to grow and spread my wings after my horrendous marriage ended, which coincided with my father dying of a rare lung cancer and my poor mum totally falling apart and moving to Barbados. She just couldn't cope with the fallout from Pop's death. At the time of Mum moving to Barbados, I didn't realise just then how important Barbados would become to me outside of many great holidays. Actually, there are some stories I can't tell about that. You have to see me in person. To top my non-fairy tale life at this point, my nana was an alcoholic and getting worse by the year, and my brother just disappeared. Don't worry, he came back. So I was alone at the ripe old age of 30 and I was single. However, I had the sending off party of a lifetime and went to London to make my fortune, leaving death, divorce and sunny Deal behind me. War zone. So I'm now at a time when I'm divorced, slimmer, good old stress, and raring to go and get a great job as a project coordinator in a well-known London architectural practice on the King's Road. Very fabulous. All I could think about was the shopping. I didn't know what project coordinator meant really, because it was sort of, they couldn't think of a proper title. But anyway, it didn't include training, and at that time I soaked up experiences like a sponge. My first project was in Zagreb in Croatia during the Croatian and Bosnian War, helping to coordinate the new design of a pharmaceutical laboratory. You see, my Pfizer experience just came in there. I actually flew out there with the team during the war, which is mad, and we were sneaked slowly across the border when things got tough until we could return to work as normal. There were very scary things happening all around, and we were in a very precarious position, as you can imagine. I lived on beer and cherries, I remember, because the food was shit. We were spat at and had money taken off us when crossing the border, and that was by the bloody immigration officers. Believe me, it was very frightening. I managed to chalk that up to experience and moved on, country and employment-wise. I wanted to train people. The urge was coming back. I was eventually poached by a huge top 5 quantity survey and project management consultancy in London, and I became a consultant over a good period of time, rebranding a department, recruiting and developing people in risk management training. Not before I had to learn it all myself though, which I hated. I'm far too fluffy and not logical at all, as anyone who knows me will tell you. New York, New York. Luckily, a great project came up in New York. Ah, my beloved America. And I jumped at the chance. We were looking at partners in New York, so had a series of meetings, but mostly had fun. Those are the days you can get away with it. I must tell you the story, though, of how I forgot to book the reservation at the Windows on the World restaurant in the Trade Centre Tower. We were to take clients for dinner there, and when I called to make the last-minute booking, they told me, sorry, no room, and there's a 3-month waiting list. Frightened of telling my boss this, I wondered what he would do. So I called them back with a plummy accent, confirming the reservation for Lord and Lady Beaverbrook and guests. At which they trotted off, mumbled something in the background and returned saying, of course, ma'am. Yeah, liars. We have the best table ready for you and we're looking forward to seeing you. I mean, honestly, a bit naughty, but hey, it worked. Now, they obviously thought we were royalty. And who was I to destroy their excitement? I didn't tell my boss or clients a thing, and I had a friend join me from the UK for the weekend too. She witnessed the whole thing and panicked right up until we left for dinner in the limo because she wasn't as brazen as I was. And I told her actually that she had to pretend to be my lady in waiting. That meant that she didn't have to say anything. We arrived all dressed up and a beautiful table was laid out, cordoned off by ropes, royal blue, very appropriate, and a row of very polished, well-presented waiters and waitresses right up to the magnificent table, and they had a wonderful view of the Hudson River and the Statue of Liberty, which looked like tiny specks below us. The maitre d' himself took care of us, and the clients were most impressed, but wondered why random people kept taking quick snapshots of us, even though I had told the restaurant not to let anyone know we were coming, and that we had specifically asked for no photos, please. Seriously. 3 cosmopolitan cocktails flowed. It was the first time I tried one and I fell in love with them instantly and drink those till today, actually. I could go on about how I stopped Lord Beaverbrook, my boss, ordering Aberdeen Angus, as we have a backyard full of the beast, darling, and how each time we got up the staff formed a bowing and curtsying line for us for the loo, and how we were announced on the dance floor, followed by clapping, but I won't. The clients couldn't believe their eyes and actually thanked us for a brilliant night. My boss in turn rewarded me with not being sacked, because I had to admit everything, obviously, at the end. Still, moving on. Oh yes, before I forget, I must tell you, we did win the project, actually while we were in New York, and they thought we were fabulous. Naturally, the blonde does it again. Okay, so that's it. I can read another excerpt to you. I've got some more children's books coming, as I said. But if you want any more, then just let me know. Have a wonderful weekend. Week 1 sort of this almost lockdown done. Let's have fun and find fun wherever we can. Talk soon.